Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out. It really means a lot. Today was supposed to be a Q&A. However, I recorded the video and it had a lot of problems. And I've been trying to fix those problems. However, I'm not sure if it's going to be fixable. So I may have to go and re-record it, which is not something I really want to do, but it may be necessary. So I'm going to push Q&A back till next week, and today will be just a quick one-off, and I think that will work just fine for all of our purposes. Before we get started, I want to say a very special thank you to both Kelly and to Alex for your donations on Patreon. That was very kind of you. Thank you so much. I don't really know what to say to that kind of stuff, but it's other than thank you, it's very kind of you. If that is something that you're interested in and you want to donate or give back or whatever, feel free to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, and a PayPal, whichever you find is most convenient for you. I'm not really the kind of person who asks for donations. This isn't really why I do this. However, when it comes, it is very wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Is there anything else I need to talk about before we got started? I kind of don't think so. I think we're kind of all set to go. I wanted to talk a bit about the ego. And this is touched on actually in the Q&A segment I just recorded and probably won't ever get to use. The ego is an interesting thing, and it's not very well understood. And for that reason, I think it might be kind of fun to, it might be kind of fun to kind of dig into it a little bit and kind of see where we go with it. It's these kind of things are fun because the way that a person is built, the way all the various components are built, are rather fascinating. It's a rather fascinating map. You know, how the mind works, how the spirit works, how the body works, how the ego works, and how it all kind of fits together like nesting dolls. And all of those things are all working together at once. And this is one of the things that, I say, and people, and a lot of mystery teachers say, and people don't really believe you when you say it, is that you're actually a plurality of beings. You're a plurality of consciousnesses all at once. From all the different parts of your personality. You have all the gods are represented in your personality. And you have the, like for instance, you have parts of you that are aggressive and who like violence. And there's parts of you who are passive and abhor violence. There's parts of you that are still a child, right? They say you're a child at heart. There's parts of you that are still very much a child and likes childish things. There's parts of you who are very serious and very studious, and they all exists at once. They're all their own. All these pieces are all their own self-willed beings, and they all exist within you. They're all you, right? They're all parts of you, but they're all separate. It's a little bit like how what the Christians say, that God is in three persons. The Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. It's very kind of similar to that, how you have a multiplicity of gods, quote unquote, within you that exists within you, and yet you are one person, right? That's how we say there's many gods and one God at the same time that govern the universe. And the same pattern exists within you. You have many gods and there's still one you, and they all exist at once. And so kind of talking about these various parts of you is really fun for me. I find it decoding the map of self is a really fun project. And so that's why we're going to talk about the ego. And one of the things to keep in mind is that you're not your mind, you're not your body, and you're not your ego. Right? You're not your mind, you're not your body, and you're not your ego. All these things are things that are used. They're not you. They're tools. You understand? They're tools. So, for instance, what is your ego? Your ego is the part of you that exists here in this reality, for all intents and purposes. For all intents and purposes, it is the you that exists here in this reality. And what we say a lot of times in the mystery schools is that you got to kill your ego. And this isn't really, and this is a bit of a blind and it's a bit of a misnomer, because you really can't actually kill your ego. If you kill your ego, you die, right? You have to have an ego. You can't exist without one, at least not here. And so what do we mean by you have to kill your ego? So your ego is a bit like your gut bacteria, is a good way of thinking about it. If you have an overgrowth of the wrong kind of bacteria in your gut, you get sick. My mother-in-law has a condition, or had a condition, called SIBO. And it's an overgrowth of the wrong kind of bacteria, and she had it her whole life, and she didn't know about it. And so she thought she was allergic to, dozens of foods. She had sleeping problems. She had mood swings. She had all kinds of these things that were making her really miserable. It's because she had too much of the wrong kind of bacteria. When she saw a naturopath who was actually willing to take on the challenge, she put her on the naturopath put my mother-in-law on a very strict diet. And I can't remember exactly what it entailed, but I think it had something to do with like eating cabbage in broth or something like that. It's just a very, very restrictive diet. And what that does is it starves out and kills all the bad bacteria that has overgrown in the gut. And then slowly over time, after all those have been died off, you slowly start adding in the correct kind of bacteria. You start feeding the right kind of bacteria, and then it restores her guts back to the way they're supposed to be. And now she's eating things that she always thought she was allergic to. Oranges, bacon, cinnamon, just these kinds of things that she thought she couldn't have, that she was allergic to, but it turns out, her mood stabilized. And it turns out that all these problems were simply due to the wrong kind of thing in her gut. Well, the ego is very much the same way. So what we say initially is that you got to kill your ego. And what we don't actually mean that you need to make your ego go away. It means that you need to reorient yourself to what a healthy ego is versus what an unhealthy ego is. So all of us have met someone who has an ego problem, right? They're intolerable to be around. No one likes to hang around people who have too much ego. And that usually shows up in things like pride. You're proud. You can't learn anything new because you think you're already right. You can't admit when you're wrong. You have bad attitude. You have misplaced. You have misplaced where your strength comes from. So instead of one of the big journeys early on in life for me was to discover what being a man was. And I spent a lot of years working on that problem. What is a real man? And you find, I didn't really know what that was until I met a real man for the first time. He was an old farmer, and he was just a really chill dude. He's very kind. He had a hand, because he was a farmer and worked with his hands all day. He would shake your hand and just like crush your hand to a pulp, just because he had such a grip. But he knew but what was different about him is like his strength was somewhere deep down in his core. And he was very masculine, but he didn't have any need to really show it off, or what am I think I'm thinking of? He didn't have anything to prove to anybody. He was. Right? He was himself. And that was something that was very different from what I'm used to seeing. Fake men, well, fake women too. It's not really a matter of the person, where they try and replicate what they think a man is, and so they go play acting. Right. I told this to my wife the other day, that I was grateful that I married a real woman. We talk all the time about what a real man is, what real masculinity is, but we very rarely talk about what a real woman is, in the same way that we talk about what a real man is. And a real woman and a real man are they're people who know where their strength comes from. They don't have anything to prove. They don't have to play act in any way. They could just enjoy what they enjoy. They could just do what they do, and they don't have to put on any airs for anybody. So we'll see, like for men, for example, we'll see fake men have to try and buy the biggest truck possible. Right? They have to try and get the hottest wife possible. They have to brag about how many people they've slept with. They have to try and prove to everyone how strong and tough they are all the time. They can never be seen to ever fail. And, you see, and kind of the same thing with women, right? Where instead of just being assured of who you are on the inside, being strong on the inside, and just being like, whatever, I like what I like, we see fake women having to buy a bunch of things in order to show other people how feminine they are, right? They have to put on airs about being good mothers. They have to do all these kinds of things to play act what they think a woman is, rather than just being a woman. And that is an ego that's out of control. Like another good example would be, if you're the kind of person who feels like they need to win an argument rather than trying to get to the truth, that's an ego that's out of balance. And we see this all the time. It's like, we see this in the media, we see this on YouTube, on social media all the time, where someone has an opinion that we don't approve of, right? Pick an issue. For heaven's sake, there's so many of them, from guns to gendering to everything. And so let's say that I have an opinion that you disagree with me on. Instead of having a discussion and trying to figure out the truth, trying to get to the truth, right? Instead of, how do I put it? instead of trying to win an argument, a person who has an ego who's in check is, instead of trying to win an argument, they're more interested in getting to the bottom of the issue, trying to understand the other person, trying to understand where they come from. And a person who doesn't have an ego problem, they're interested in the truth. And so they know that all people, all men, all women, all things are their teacher. And so everyone has something to teach you. And there's I'm going to butcher this because I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but there's a key in the Odinic mysteries that says, I am no one's equal, for all people are my teachers. Something like that. My teacher's probably going to kick me in the ass for saying it wrong, but that's essentially how it goes. I am no one's equal, for I am a student to all things. All things are my teacher. And so it doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to you or to someone who has an ego that's where it's supposed to be, what the other person believes, because even if they believe something that I disagree with, they know something that I don't know. And so it's up to me to find what that is. And people who have genuine opinions usually have good reasons for why they believe what they believe. And what do I mean by a genuine opinion? So there's a phenomenon, and there's actual name for it, psychological name for it, and I don't even remember what the name for it is. But essentially what it is that when you are listening to an expert, for example, so let's say you're listening to like a Ben Shapiro or a Rachel Maddow or a Tucker Carlson, or, we'll just say like some big name expert on something. What happens when you hear them talk is you take on the assumed belief systems of what you're hearing. And I'm not doing this justice. I'm trying to figure out how to work this out. So essentially what happens is you hear someone talking and your mind says, oh, I already know that and I already believe it, is essentially the way the phenomenon goes. And then so it's not even really your opinion. It's just what you were told, and your brain says, oh, that sounds good, so I must think that too. But what happens, though, is when you're confronted on those opinions, because they're not actually yours, and you haven't done the work to get there, you can't argue your point at all. It just falls flat on the floor. And we see this constantly on the news, because people, what they do is they'll take out a microphone and go interview a bunch of people, and then just do a compilation, and they call it idiot compilations, where they just show all the morons trying to answer questions. You're always going to find stupid people out there, but so those things don't really prove anything. But that's essentially what happens, is you find people who have heard a bunch of stuff that they think sounds great, but they've never actually formed any of those opinions naturally on their own, and so they can't back it up when it actually comes time to backing it up. So those are examples of things that have an ego that is out of control. So likewise, like an ego that is in control. And no one's perfect, and you're never going to fully ever truly get there. But because everything is always a process. You're always a student, and you're always trying to get better. But with that said, an ego that's in control, like I was saying, is someone who you don't have anything to prove to anybody. You don't need to prove anything to anybody. You just are. And so if someone comes up comes up to you and would say something egregious, you would say, "Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that." And then instead of trying to win an argument, what you do is you trying to find the truth of it. Like, whoa, you have an opinion that I never heard before or is different from mine. Let's try and figure out where you're coming from. Maybe you have a good reason for believing what you believe. And you'll find that these people, you'll find this in mythology with the wisdom gods, and you'll find this a lot even with modern day gurus, Sadhguru and some of these others alike, where they don't debate people. If you ever noticed, if you ever listened to them like Q&As or whatever, they don't really argue with people. They'll answer questions, but they don't get in debates. Very rarely do you see them ever get into a debate. Very rarely do you ever hear Jesus getting into a debate. They're interested in hearing people, and they're interested in answering questions, and they're interested in teaching. You'll almost never hear them try to actually change somebody's mind, because the ego wants to win the battle. The ego wants to stand on top of the mountain and beat its chest and saying, "I'm the victor. Look at me. I have converted you into my belief system." You very rarely will ever find someone who, of any amount of enlightenment, ever actually try very hard to convince anyone of anything. Because the belief is that those who are ready to hear will hear, and those who don't won't. Right. I don't need to prove anything to you. I let what I say stand on its own merits, and you believe me or you don't, like me or you don't. It's not a big deal for me, right? So the mechanics of it work like this. So that's kind of what the ego is. That's how it behaves in the underworld. So think of yourself like as a person sitting in a boat. Excuse me. I apologize for that. Think of yourself as someone sitting in a boat. And actually, hindsight says I probably should have led with this. But I didn't. I'm sorry. Anyway. So you're sitting in a boat, and there's a rudder on the boat. The person sitting in the boat is the real you. That's the true you. There's talks they say about the difference between me and I. Right? The person sitting in the boat is the real person. That's the real consciousness that is driving this whole mechanism. The ego would be like the boat itself. It's the thing that's carrying you through the underworld. And the rudder in the back is the mind. The mind steers the ego, and you sit inside the ego on your way through the underworld. So there is an interesting battle that goes on between the boat and the rudder. The boat will want to go its own way. The rudder will want to go a different way. And then you, on the inside of the boat, has its own wills and wants too. And you want to go a certain way. So those three entities together are fighting back and forth to see who has power. And it is up to you to get mastery over your own mind, to get mastery over your boat, so that you could go the direction that you want to go. Because the ego is more than happy to become God of this existence. It's more than happy to become the thing that is in control. The same thing with the mind. There's an old saying that says the mind is a great servant but a poor master. And is very much the truth. The mind is more than happy to take control, and you'll go, and it'll just go its own way. And if you're not keeping up on it, you'll get whisked off to some place you don't want to go. So it's up to you to get control over yourself. And one of the things I preach constantly, and I had to laugh because I did a video a while back about how when I was younger I was an incel, and how I came out of that. And the thesis of that whole video was self-responsibility, right? If you're having problems, if everybody on earth is having problems with you, maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe you're the person who's having issues, right? Maybe it's not everyone else. Maybe it's you. And again, that's an ego thing. I can't possibly take responsibility for my own actions. I can't possibly do that. It's always somebody else's fault. I'm flawless, right? I don't ever do anything bad. I don't ever make mistakes. That's the ego talking. It's when you could say, listen, there's something going on with me that isn't right, and I'm really struggling here. How come I'm freaking girls out? This is the thesis of my I was an incel video. Why am I freaking girls out? I know in my heart that I'm a good guy, right? I'm not trying to be a creep, but there's something that I'm doing that isn't working. So maybe I should figure out what that is and change it, so that way I don't have to keep suffering. And in order to do that, you have to kill the bad ego and replace it with a good ego, with a good gut bacteria, so that you can digest the information properly instead of having it upset you all the time. You got to be like the wind, or what's the word? No, you got to be like the grass and not like the tree. You got to be able to bend with the things that come at you, rather than being rigid with a stern ego, then always get broken and beat up. People with bad egos are miserable people. They're always suffering because they're too rigid, because they take everything too personally, instead of taking everything as a teaching, as a way to. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Instead of taking everything as a way to learn and to grow, they take it as an assault on them. And that's a major problem. We have that in our society constantly, right? My way is the right way. I know best. Everyone else is wrong. How dare you treat me that way? Shame on you. You're a horrible person. And it's, sometimes you got to agree to disagree. And sometimes it's worthy to just know where people, even if you don't come to a conclusion, it's worthy to know where people come from. And I really mean that, when you really know where somebody comes from. Not just, I have a guess, but really know. Why does a conservative believe what they believe? Do you really know why a conservative believes what they believe? Or do you just guess? Right? Why do racists believe what they believe? Do you really know why? Is it because they're hateful? Is it really that simple? Or is there really something fundamentally, is there a cause to that that's way down deep inside that is causing that behavior? And these are important questions. And if you're someone who is interested in knowing the truth and knowing wisdom, then you have to be able to sit down, shut up, and listen to people. And be willing, when the first things my teacher asked me, before I got to join a mystery school, before anything like that, when I first met my teacher, one of the very first things he asked me is, are you willing to be wrong? Are you willing to be wrong? Are you? Are you willing to hear things you disagree with? Are you willing to have your mind changed? This is one of the things that people always give lip service to, but aren't ever really willing to do. People are always willing to say, oh, I'm humble, I can have my mind changed, I'm a reasonable person, I love science and I love reason. But I'm not willing to listen to anybody. You know? And that's an ego that's out of balance. So it's not about, you can't ever really get rid of your ego, but like the gut bacteria, you can replace it with something that is healthy. You can have a functional mind that can steer your ego where it needs to go with you in control. Because if you just let yourself be blown about by the winds of chance, you're going to be dashed against the rocks in your little boat over and over again, and you're going to look around and saying, how come bad things keep happening to me? Well, bad things keep happening to you because you're not the one who's in control of your existence. Your body is in control, your ego is in control, your mind is in control, outside forces are in control, and you're just along for the ride. And you just get to be blown about like the wind, and you're like, why do I keep suffering? Well, you keep suffering because you're not in control. You're not the one who's in control. Everything else in your life is in control. But you're not. You get to just go with the flow. And this is why, and this is kind of my last point before I go. And this is really the true nature of power. The true nature of power, like they talk about this in the Tao Te Ching too, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. The true nature of power is being flexible and being bendable. It's being like the wind. The wind is incredibly powerful, but it is bendable and it is movable. People think that power is brute strength and force, and that isn't the case. That's breakable. And it's going to cause you harm if you have that kind of thought process. But if you're like the wind, if you're like the grass, you could blow in the wind. The grass is the only thing that survives during a windstorm. The houses will blow away. The trees will blow down. The barns will get crashed. The cows will get tossed in the air. But the grass will still be there. And it's because it has a capacity to bend. And that's what true humility is. That's what a real ego is in its fullest potential, is the ability to take information, to take criticism, to take those things that come after us and bend with them and learn from them and know that everything is a teaching thing, and you're no one's equal because all things are your master. It's very counterintuitive, but that is the only way to truly set yourself free. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay. Well, my friends, thank you so much for joining me. Again, I'm sorry about the Q&A. It'll be up next week. I'm probably going to have to as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at it, and I'm probably going to have to just re-record it. This was actually part of one of the questions, actually. One of the questions was directly about the ego. So maybe this was a Q&A after all. Okay, you guys. I love you. Eyes to the skies, travelers. Keep your eyes up there. The gods are coming back. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.